the Morse Code Podcast, where we talk with entrepreneurially minded creatives in music, film, and writing. My name is Korby, and I'm hoping these conversations inspire you to push deeper into your own work, whether you're a full-time professional or just starting out on your own creative odyssey. Really excited to share this conversation with writer and actor Julian Vaca. The first installment of his duology, The Memory Index, was published by HarperCollins in 2022. It was a Tome Student Literacy Society IT List Book Award nominee in 2023, the same year his second installment, The Recall Paradox, was published. He also received the 2023 Nashville Literacy Leader Award. He's a young guy and he's already got 2 full-length books out, all while raising 4 kids. So, get busy, people. Julian's also super active in the Nashville writing scene, whether as an instructor at the Porch Writers Collective, a Penn Faulkner Writers in School author, or as a Hey Young Writer mentor. Lastly, he's a screen actor. He would never tell you this, but he's earned a principal role on Still the King, a comedy starring Billy Ray Cyrus that ran for 2 seasons on CMT. The last time we got together, it was over cocktails at the Urban Cowboy, and all we did was trade takes on favorite books. I promise this conversation will be more directed. If you get something out of the Morse Code Podcast, please like and subscribe. And now, here's my conversation with Julian Vaca. Julian Vaca, thank you so much for making a little time to talk to us.
Dude, thank you for having me.
I'm so excited for whatever is about to happen.
Likewise.
And part of that's because of the last time that we hung out, which was about a month and a half ago or something at the Urban Cowboy. It was just, the time went way too quickly. And I felt like we were just scratching the surface. So,
I agree. And I was just going to add to that, yes, time flew, but what was, I thought, beautiful about it was because we have so many shared interests and because we're fortunate enough to have a lot of mutual friends, it felt like we had known each other a long time and we were just picking up where we left off, even though it was the first time we had actually met in person.
Yeah, except for briefly, and I told you the story, but I'll relay it for our friends, is we're both, associates in this book community. Mm-hmm. And occasionally there are these, they're not meetings, hangs that Amy puts together, Amy McConnell, our friend.
That's
and
right.
There's this one at this bar called Otto in West Nashville. And my wife and I were just kind of toying with kind of getting back on the wagon, drying up for a couple of weeks or just to experiment with that. And I was 2 days into it and I'm sitting there with this mixer, sort of socially awkward and uncomfortable, drinking my LaCroix. And, you just all of a sudden just right there. And I was like, oh, Julian, I'd seen you at the writer conference and I so wanted to talk to you. And you were so gracious and then the smoothest mood ever. You're just holding 2 old fashions and you're just like, hey man, great to see you. And you just hand me one. I'm like, it's too good. I can't not.
So
man, you broke me. That was your first gesture.
I'm so sorry about that. And what's funny is I don't typically make it a habit to just gift people old fashions, but there was something about you. I was like, man, I just feel like we're going to really hit it off. And yes, I thank you for clarifying. We had briefly met at that writer conference, Writer Fest, the year before. And then very briefly, we got to hang out at Otto's. So technically our time at Urban Cowboy wasn't the first time that we met in person, though it was the first time that we actually got to really dig in.
First quality time.
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry about that, about making you break your dry spell there, but
time well spent. I really feel like it was worth every drop.
And to add to that, I think for whatever reason there was something chaotic happening back at home, and I had to run. And so I think I dropped it off and then ran. You
basically did, because I was like, well, I didn't even get to thank him.
That's right.
I was like, man, this guy just ghosted me with a drink. It was awesome. Well, let's talk about books.
Yeah, man.
I feel like one of my great pleasures in life is talking about books, and it's an itch that hasn't not been scratched until quite recently, because I've been in the music community for so long, and musicians are too busy making music to spend time reading books and much less talk about them. So I'm excited about this. And maybe the first thing is to say thank you for these books that you just gave me off camera. And I like most people, it would just be an amazing feat to publish a novel. But you just have to be better than everyone and do 2 at once. Can you talk about how that happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always had a love for storytelling, and for the longest time, I thought that screenwriting was going to be how I realized that dream and that passion. And so I graduated from college with a concentration, with a BFA and a concentration in screenwriting. And so I thought, man, I had this romantic outlook on post college life, thinking, okay, I've got my degree. I've got my interest and my certification in screenwriting. Now I just wait around for all the studios to knock on my door and give me a job. And of course, quickly realized that's not how it works. And as you know, filmmaking is such a unique medium in that it requires the involvement of so many different people. To realize a short film, to realize a pilot, to realize a feature, you really need involvement from a lot of talented people. And so I think I was feeling this kind of anxiousness to create, to storytell. And so after a stint at a desk job, I just turned to my wife one day and I said, I'm just feeling creatively unfulfilled. I have these stories that I want to tell. And she encouraged me and said, look, we don't have a mortgage right now. We don't have kiddos yet. Why don't you just quit, maybe work part-time at a bookstore and just focus on your novels. Because the novel medium was something that really interested me, because it's just you and a blank page. If you want to tell a story, it's just
incredible.
It's just you and a notepad.
Pure freedom.
Exactly. And that really excited me. And of course, I say this all the time to folks, but writers are readers first. And so I've always loved the written word. I've always loved, novels and fiction. And so long story short, quit that job. And also I should say, as an aside, I realized that's a very privileged thing that I was afforded, a very privileged opportunity. Not everyone can just up and quit their job and go pursue creative writing, for a season. So I just want to say that I recognize, and it's not lost on me,
yes, how
fortunate and blessed I was to be able to do that.
And to have a partner that allowed, that was a huge part of that privilege. I mean, that's incredible.
Absolutely. So I spent a few years independently publishing some books. I was involved in some creative writing workshops, and just really got to learn a lot about the independent and self-publishing process through that season. And then fast forward, our family started to grow, ended up taking a more traditional copywriting job in marketing, and then right before the pandemic hit, a dear friend of mine who's also an editor reached out and said, hey, I'm going to be taking this job at a nonfiction imprint at HarperCollins, and I'd love to facilitate an intro with an acquiring editor there. Let's get a manuscript in front of them. And so, those of you that know anything about publishing, that's a very unconventional path to getting a meeting. Usually you query a manuscript and you try to find an agent. Yeah. And once you get an agent, they're the ones that are championing for you and going to publishers and promoting you and your work to potential editors. And it's a really long process. And so again, just very fortunate to have, got invited to have a seat at the table and to, pitch a novel. And the editor at the time, who's no longer with that imprint, she really was, excited about my writing, but they didn't want to release something that I had previously self-published. So then they came back to me and said, what other ideas you have? And so that's where the memory index came from, an exercise in going back to the drawing board and saying, okay, if this is my one shot, what story am I really excited about telling?
Amazing. And so did you create a proposal when they came to you, and how long was that? And how much time did you spend on that?
Yeah. Great questions. So when they came back to me, the initial thing that I set out to do was create a sort of pitch deck. I pulled in visual elements and comp titles, and I really started to think about, like, okay, if I'm going to pitch my dream trilogy, what would it look like? And then I wrote some sample chapters, so about 15,000 words. And so between the pitch deck and the sample chapters, I presented this proposal to the editor, and the conversation, quickly, turned from, we like this idea, to, okay, we really like this idea. How can we make it work? And ultimately they came back and said, well, because you're a no-name author at this point, let's not do 3 books. Let's do 2 instead. And I was like, yeah, I'll do 1. I mean, I'm just grateful for an opportunity. So another unconventional, aspect of my story there, selling a novel on spec and not a completed manuscript, which was a very interesting experience.
And did they release the books close together?
They did. So, and that was another learning thing for me, because I would have thought, okay, you release the first book 1 year, and then to drum up interest and to generate excitement, you really drag that out, and maybe it's 1 or 2 years before you release the sequel. Well, because again, I'm a no-name author, they like to ride the momentum of the first release. So book 1 came out in August of 2022, and then the sequel came out earlier this year in April of 2023. So there was a 8 or 9 month turnaround there in terms of the release.
Exciting.
Yeah.
You strike me, just based on following you on the socials and stuff, as and just in the short time that we spent together, as a real go-getter, just personality wise. And I want to get into that a little bit more, but maybe this could relate to the current topic on how involved has the publisher been in marketing the book versus how much have you felt like you had to shoulder?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think a lot of first-time authors, or maybe aspiring authors who hope to get traditionally published, I think there's this tendency to think that, okay, once the ink dries on your book deal, you've got an army of publicists and marketers, and you've got everybody who's working, around the clock to make sure that your book, hits all the lists. And maybe that's true of some authors who sign the bigger 6-figure deals. But for most authors, generally speaking, there's a lot of participation that's still required of the author to go out there and fill out the author forms on book festivals, and doing everything that they can to make it happen, to self-promote on socials. And I think because I was in self-publishing for a number of years, that transition was very seamless. I was already used to and excited by the opportunities and the prospect of getting out there and sharing my books with folks. And so a lot of the school visits, a lot of the book festivals, a lot of the podcast, appearances, a lot of those are shouldered by me. And I don't say that from a point of disappointment or wishing that my team or my publisher did more necessarily. But I get it. I'm just one author in their catalog.
Sure.
And there's only so much that they can do. And so I think stepping into that role of being a traditionally published author with the expectation and the right understanding that, okay, I'm still going to carry a lot of this has, I think, really helped me, maintain a healthy perspective on everything.
Absolutely. I love this subject. And that's in fact one of the real main thrusts of this podcast is talking about and trying to empower similarly creative folks to take it upon themselves to get the word out. And that's really a difficult thing.
Yeah.
It comes to second nature at best, I think, with creatives in general. And I know that in my own journey, I had to make peace with that necessary aspect of the gig.
Oh, absolutely.
Years ago. Yeah.
Absolutely. And especially if as artists we're endeavoring to be humble and maintain that sense of humility. How does one strike the balance of, I'm going to be humble and I'm going to recognize that my art isn't for everyone and that's okay, but also I need to be confident when I'm speaking to it and hoping to excite other people about the art that I've created. So there is a balance there of, okay, maintaining humility and also confidence in the art that you've created.
I mean, it's an artist and salesman job. That's the gig now. Gone are the days, really, where you can pen your opus behind closed doors, send it to the people, and they make all the noise for you, and you can just humbly accept your laurels when they come.
That's so true.
It's not really possible.
No.
And I know I can share. Maybe I'll share a tiny bit of my own publishing story, just because as a way of establishing some common ground.
Yeah.
But I had a book get published in 2015, a collection of short stories called Medium Hero, and how that happened was I was touring a lot at the time for music. I thought well, the merch table needed another high dollar item. And I had been writing these short stories forever. I'm passionate about it first and foremost. So that was there. But I thought, well, I went through those short stories and I thought I probably had 60 of them. And I never tried to publish them or anything. I just would post them on my Facebook page, whatever, just like as an exercise, put them in newsletters. And I sort of I had a mild knack for keeping them in a folder somewhere. Like it wasn't even very well organized. Anyway, when the time came, I went through and I was like, I think 20 of these are pretty good. So I went through those with a friend, edited them, and self-published a little book, probably like you did. I can't even remember the name of the company, but there's plenty of people that you can format the thing. I remember formatting the book was the worst week of my life. It was so hard to get that, like whatever program it is. I'm sure it's better now. But anyway, did that. And I was like, I would really love for this to be published, but I have no idea how to do that. I think I had less contacts. I had no idea. And, but so I self-published the book. I didn't even put an ISBN. I didn't register it, thinking that, well, maybe in some dream world, somebody will find it and then see that it hasn't been formally published and then take it upon themselves. And so for like 4 months, I just sold it at the shows, and that was that. And then I played. We had a guest earlier on, my friend Katie McDougall, who is a co-founder of The Porch. I don't know. She and I are dear friends, and I got involved on the ground floor with them. And helped. I was part of one of their early fundraisers, their annual fundraisers, and I had this idea of this gig called The Tale of Two Tims, and we had Tim O'Brien, the writer, and Tim O'Brien, the musician, that came. It was wonderful, and as maybe by way of thanks, or just because Katie and Susanna are really nice, they let me play a couple of songs at that event. I played those couple of songs. I mentioned that I had a book, and my now friend Stephanie Beard from Turner Publishing approached at the end of the show and was just like, hey, you said what? And I was like, yeah. And so she went and bought it. And then like 3 weeks later, I got an email from her saying like, hey, I noticed this hasn't been published, blah, blah, blah. That was the beginning of the conversation. They published it. Fantastic. But I knew and know that Turner, they're cranking out tons of titles every year. And here's this little thing that one person at that company fell in love with. They're not going to make a lot of money on that. And consequently, they're not going to spend a bunch of time on promoting it. I knew that. And I also thought, here's this, what can I bring to the table given my experience and connections and whatever to help, bring this book to a larger audience? And it's like, well, I do tour. I know how to do that. And I also know how to book tours, and I know how to reach out to people and write emails that are short enough and long enough and detailed enough, whatever. Been doing that for years. And so second the book I knew when the publishing date was going to happen, I booked my own tour of 30 cities in America and all the bookstores, and I had this little bit. They also hired a publicist, and it got some good reviews, and that really helped get into some of the bigger markets. But and the publicist also helped. I was on a couple like morning TV shows. I don't think that moved the bottom line at all. It was fun to do. It was like fun for the social media posting, but being able to just like go from city to city to city. I'm not even sure if it sold a lot of books, but it did raise awareness, and within my own fan base, which I'd been establishing for many years, then I was able to sell those books to them. And even still at shows, like I still sell a fair amount of books per show when I play.
That's awesome.
But the point of that is just to all say that like, I don't, and I didn't then, and I don't now think that it's anyone's responsibility but my own to get my stuff out there. No one cares about it as much as I do. Yeah. And I think that, I think you exemplify that to a T. Man,
that's all so well said. And I think, you're so right in saying that no one is going to care about your work more than you. And I think understanding that is very freeing, because then it removes this this notion that like, you're projecting all these expectations on your team and your publicist and the marketing team and all this. And once that clicks for you, it's very freeing. And it should spill out of us naturally as creatives. Like if we're proud of the work that we've created, it should come out authentically and naturally as we're, networking and meeting with folks and self-promoting and promoting the work. And so, yeah, you said something earlier that I've never really considered, but it's true. Like we're writers, we're creatives, and salesmen in almost an equal measure there. And so I think that's important to definitely lean into.
Yeah.
When you're tackling, self-promotion.
I've noticed that there's been some important like mental shifts for me that have helped kind of overcome this sense of shyness or unworthiness, or or just like, I don't know, I'm a mild-mannered person, and I don't really like want to elbow my way into somebody's life or consciousness necessarily. But I am excited about what I do, and I am excited about the work. And that's been so helpful for me to just think about, like, whenever I'm reaching out or make a post or whatever, it's not like I'm not asking for attention or bragging, or it's just like, hey, I'm excited about this, and then I can put that out there and let it go.
Yeah.
It's just like, I'm excited about this. Maybe you'll be excited about it too. It's okay either way. I'm not apologizing or asking, or it's just like, hey, I'm sharing this.
Yeah.
Take it or leave it.
Your worth is not measured in how many people your social media posts reach or how many likes they earn you. You're just using the tools at your disposal, like email marketing and social media, as a megaphone to share how excited you are about your work. And that can be a paradigm shift for folks. Like, yeah, my value, my worth is not defined by how well this thing does or doesn't do. And like, if you can just, embrace that, it's a total shift for you on how to use the tools that we have, because, social media can be an icky thing for folks, and it can feel inauthentic or disingenuous, but it is just a megaphone. It's just a tool. So I definitely share in that perspective and how to use, social media. You're excited about it.
Yeah.
And that's why you're sharing
that. I mean, like, this podcast is something that me and Kyler are excited about. And I mean, we're putting out, this is just the beginning of a shit ton of content that's coming out into the world. And, I could look at that as being like, God, Korby, who do you think you are? You're just like making a video of yourself week after week. I mean, it is like, from one perspective, I'm like, God, get it over yourself. But the other side of it is that, like, I love this. I love talking to you. I love independent creative people so much. I think that it's so important to the world that they're individual human beings making art from their own heart and their own perspective. The world desperately needs it, and it's increasingly harder. There's so much noise in the world, and it can be overpowering. I feel overpowered. So it's a way of like self-therapy in a sense, of just like talking to other people who I see doing it, who I admire, not only creatively but like hustle wise, and fostering this community of people that, like, maybe we can all help each other rise up, and if nothing else, just stay inspired and stay at it and stay creative.
Here.
Yeah, it's like, if somebody hates the content, I don't know, I guess it's not for them.
Yeah,
but it's going to be for some people.
Yeah. And it really is that simple.
Yeah, totally.
And it's interesting how the inner critic in all of us finds unique ways to manifest itself in different areas of the creative process. So there's the inner critic when you're creating, who's telling you that you're wasting your time, that you're not good enough. Then there's the inner critic in you that raises their voice when you're trying to share your stuff with friends and get feedback. And then there's the inner critic when you're trying to market and do exciting things like a podcast or other channels. That inner critic is in all of us and finds different ways to manifest itself. And it's a daily exercise in silencing that inner critic and embracing the truth. So, yeah, just an aside.
Absolutely. And I would also maybe add that I don't think it's the inner critic is a really important component of the creative act, because that critic is also helping you form your work and make it better. And, when it comes to the marketing side of it, that inner critic, you got to be able to put stuff out, but you also got to look at what you're doing critically.
Absolutely.
And go like, is this authentic to me? Is this effective? Like, you only have so many hours in the day that you can't do everything all the time. So you have to like pick the best use of your time, given your limited resources. And I'm like, I'm a slow to learn almost everything. And that's been one that has been hardest for me to learn, probably, is this, like, and I'm still learning it, how to pare down the promotional side of what I do, or which promotional side to take on that's going to have the highest impact, so that I can spend my best hours doing the actual work.
Yeah.
And like splitting that balance is always challenging. And you always have to kind of be ruthless about, could I be doing this better? Could I be doing this different? And so, like, I'm like taking that information not as a way to be like, ugh, I can't get up out of bed and I'm just not going to do it, and who am I anyway? But that inner critic of being like, listening to the inner critic and going like, yeah, I'm going to do it like that.
Yeah.
And hopefully, like, my inner critic isn't saying, I think my inner critic, the critic that says, like, give up, you're not going to make it. I don't know. I haven't really given that guy the time of day for so long that he hasn't really, like, I don't,
that's awesome.
I'm going to die soon. I always think about that. Like, I'm like, there's so little time. There's so little time in the day and in our lives. We're all going to be dead soon. I'm going to be dead soon. I think about it all the time. And so knowing that, I like have, 15 or 20 years left. And man, there's things I want to do, and I might suck at them. I still don't really know what I'm good at, really. I'm getting better at a few things, but I'm like, maybe I should be a novelist. Maybe I should stop screenwriting. Screenwriting's fairly new to me. Maybe all of this is just a distraction to what I'm really supposed to be doing, which is what I started out doing, which was writing songs. All of these things are possible.
Yeah.
But I'm still going to just do my best to make one thing, or do it like, this is what I'm doing right now. Trusting that I'll know better as I keep doing this, what I should be best spending my time on.
Yeah. Somebody, when I was early on in career changes and going into marketing and using my creative writing and pivoting into copywriting and learning about all that stuff, I was a part of a young marketing team at a startup. And our leader once said, because we were feeling overwhelmed, other teams within the company were coming to us, it felt like hourly, with different tasks. And he said, you know what, we need to remember this as a team. Just because we can do anything doesn't mean that we can do everything. And that echoes in my mind to this day, and it's been applicable in my own personal creative endeavors as well, as a healthy reminder that, I really ought to be focusing and trying to zero in on the things that I'm most passionate about and the things that I most care about, because just because someone can do anything, again, doesn't mean that they should try to do everything.
Absolutely.
So I thought that was really profound.
What do you think you're best at in this game?
I think
good at. Maybe
thank you.
Keep it at that.
Yeah. Thank you for rewording that. I think storytelling in the written word. I think I'm really passionate about, this is another love that you and I share for acting. We both are fortunate enough to be represented by some amazing agencies here in town on the acting front. And so I love that. And I also really enjoy being behind the camera sometimes with, short films or other projects. But I keep returning to the written word, and specifically in the novel writing sort of medium, because I feel like that's where I'm both challenged the most and also the most comfortable, not complacent, but where I feel the most comfortable and confident while still being challenged. Because, writing a novel, it's an investment of your time. It's a marathon. Right now, at the time of the recording of this podcast, NaNoWriMo is happening, which is the National Novel Writing Month challenge that happens, I think, at a global level, where basically writers come together and create a profile on nanowrimo.org and collectively endeavor to write a 50 to 60,000 word novel at the end of November. I'm going to participate this year again. I've created a profile. I'm trying to get a crude first draft of another novel done at the end of the month. But yeah, man, to answer your question, I think novel writing is where I'm most challenged and most confident at the same time.
And do you, when you're setting out to write a novel, a long form narrative story, do you plot out where it's going to go? Do you write to discover combination of those two things?
It's definitely a combination of those two things. I think, outlining is something that works really well for some writers. For me, I felt like it robbed me of the joy of the actual creative process because I was focusing so much on the front end. Okay, beat for beat, 3-act structure, what's happening here, and what's happening here, and how does it resolve itself? I tend to work best when I come up with a seed of an idea, I have my protagonist, I figure out what their goal is and what the main conflict is preventing them from achieving that goal, and then I just follow them on their journey and just discover, like you said, there's that discovery writing that sort of happens. And then at the end of that first draft, that has become an outline of sorts. And then, like Neil Gaiman says, you go back in that second or subsequent draft and you start to pretend like you knew what you were doing all along. So the first draft for me becomes an outline of sorts, but I think that I'm most productive when I just come up with a few ingredients, a few elements, and then I see where the story takes me.
And will you invent characters along the way as needed, or do you kind of have a handful of characters in mind, or a couple, or is it just the protagonist, the principal goal, and the principal obstacle?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of all of that. I think I will come up with some side characters, certainly the main character, and then also the main air quotes villain or antagonist, a couple of the side characters, and then I just follow that main character on their quest, and along the way, other characters will materialize and other elements of the story will materialize. The world building will start to happen. That's one of the great things about science fiction, which, my debut duology is in that subgenre. It's a huge sandbox, and science fiction is really just the vehicle for unpacking human themes. And so I think in speculative fiction, we get this luxury of having these really fun, fantastical elements to play with. And so, and there's established tropes, there's established, rules, I guess, within that subgenre. And so I think it's really fun. It's a really fun sandbox to play in. But that was a really long-winded answer to your question of, I just sort of go with the flow, trust the process. That sounds like such a cop-out, trusting the process. But if you put the work in every day, you'd be very shocked to discover how, maybe not easy, but how it does sort of coalesce and come together, the story writing process.
I marvel at the work that happens when you sit down to write a story or a song. In this case, we'll say a story, because it's very mysterious what's going on there. I don't know how to write a story. I don't actually know how to write a song. I've done it many times over. Every single time I do it, I'm like, how am I going to do that? I really don't. And there's something incredibly, it's sacred. I don't know. It's a spiritual thing. It's deeply mysterious. We'll say that. And there's something that's so, like, one of the reasons why I believe in this, like, the worth of creative effort is that it puts us in touch with something like eternal and something ineffable, and it also makes it absolutely personal and immediate. And it's also not something that, maybe your name is on this book, but it's not clear who wrote this book or what wrote this book. It's very, it's strange. Anyway, I keep repeating myself.
No. That's a really, really great point. That's great insight, because you don't really understand what that, I said trust the process earlier. You don't really understand what that process is, if there even is one, until you do the work of creating. And so, I wish I could say once you write your first novel, it demystifies the whole process. But every story, every novel comes with its own set of challenges and obstacles and, problems to try and solve for. So
it's anything but a formula.
Absolutely. And, they tell you, that you've got to follow this certain kind of formula or this certain set of beats to tell a cohesive story. But there are plenty of novels where characters just meander, or it's a day in the life of, or it's a portrait of grief, or a portrait of this, and it doesn't follow that traditional story structure. And so, you're so right. It's anything but a formula.
This is a great segue into, well, first of all, you're a really good writer. I'm not very far into the first of the books, but it's clear that you have massive facility with prose, and it's just fun. Your lead off sentence is just like, okay, I'm in. Thanks, dude. It's playful. You're a playful writer, and it's such a joy to be part of. Also, the inscription. There's a couple things I want to talk about with your book, but we have a shared fan in Saul Bellow, who you quote at the beginning of the book, and he's a great example to me of a kind of reading that I so enjoy, and a kind of book that I so enjoy, where not much happens.
Yeah.
It's just like really fun to hang out with the characters.
Yes.
And I mean, I've read so many books, and some of my favorite books, there's not a ton that happens in the book, or they follow a really non-traditional narrative arc. And I think that we are actually talking about this at Urban Cowboy, but one of my favorite writers in fairly new discovery is this guy, Karl Ove Knausgaard. And I think that you had written him down because you were like, you'd never heard of him before.
Yes.
And he's a great example. I mean, the dude is like actually internationally famous now, even though strangely he writes in Swedish, and his books are, it's like memoir fiction.
I was going to say, this is the guy who was like somewhat autobiographical, but not really.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's ruthlessly autobiographical, and that's why he's a sort of a controversial figure for a number of reasons. But one of them is that he's like puts his family in the books by name, and like his marriage, and there's something like, maybe exploitative about that to your relations. But at the same time, he skewers himself ruthlessly. And it's part of what, you're like reading this, these stupid decisions he's made. I won't like go super into it, but like it makes you reflect on your own idiocy, your own triumphs. And there's something, I don't know, it's wildly entertaining. Also, the writing's great, but it's just to say a little bit more, and then I'll be done with Karl. Is that he's most famous for a 6-part series of books he wrote called My Struggle, about his trying to write a novel. And it's, it covers all these epochs of his life. And I kind of read one a year because I like them too much. And I just like savor it. I don't want it to end. So I've got one more book to read, but like, that's a great example of, I've never read, he's also like, has a few more traditional novels. I haven't read them yet. But I'm so glad that he wrote this way for these books, because they're so special. Yeah. And, so that's a great point. And I think about this all the time, man, because I'm kind of in my screenwriting phase right now. I just finished a feature based on my wife Randa's life. We can talk about that later. But and I'm like, I don't know, I'm on draft 10 or something. We had a table reading for it last week. It was so painful. To like watch all the actors say all the worst. And so you got an audience, and you're also like hearing your own writing in your face. And some of it was funny, but a lot of it was just like, I wish I could take that back. And also, man, I learned one thing. If I learned one thing about that screenplay, is that there was way too much ink on the page. Screenwriting, like I come at writing from a novelistic perspective too. I love books first and foremost, and you got to paint that picture, man. And you also got time. Yeah, there's no rules to novel writing. As long as you can make the reader want to read one sentence after another, you're doing what you need to do. Yeah, screenwriting, not so much. Yeah, you've got no time, and you're also, it's like a screenwriting is a blueprint. A screenplay is a blueprint, and when at least if you're working within the industry and you're trying to get attention with very busy people who are financially motivated, you got to get in and get out really quick. Anyway, that was one thing. But so I'm very grateful that he wrote non-traditional, and I wonder too if I'm like, especially with screenplay writing, I've read all the books, and there's things about them I've learned so much. I'm so grateful because I want to write great stories, but I notice that I'm a bit of a weirdo when it comes to how I make stories happen. And I'm like, write from a very emotional place. I do write to discover, and maybe there's room for the non-linear storytelling in all of it.
Absolutely.
And to what extent do I adhere to the principles, and to what extent do I just be like, fuck it?
Yeah.
Like, this is what I'm feeling this.
Yeah. No, I think that's, I'm so glad you said that, because I read recently somewhere, somebody was giving, I'm trying to remember who the author's name, but he was basically like, in the revision process where you're going back and you're rereading what you've written, one of the most important things to look for is, if it sounds like writing, rewrite it. And I think what happens for me is, when I think too much about the rules and the principles, it can box me in. And if I'm trying too hard to hit certain hero's journey beats, like we talk all the time in the screenwriting world about that hero's journey, the inciting incident, the refusal of the call, and you start, obsessing over beats. But what we ought to do as storytellers is try to be as authentic as we possibly can to our own voice and our own story. And that's what's going to make us decidedly us. And that's what's going to make our stories sound distinctly different. So I would always encourage people, anyone who's listening to the podcast, or you, or even to myself, preaching this to myself, saying it in a mirror, always strive to be authentic to your voice. And those principles and all that stuff, maybe down the line, if you're having a serious conversation with an investor, or you're having a conversation with a director, and you start thinking through like, okay, how can maybe we structure this a little bit more? Maybe there's a time for that. But in that initial first draft, getting the story on the page, realizing your story, be true to your voice and be as authentic as you possibly can. Rules
be damned, kind of, in a way.
Exactly.
Just, you can shape. I don't know about you, but for me, way easier to edit than to create.
Completely agree. And I think let's not throw rules out the window completely. I think there is some truth to understanding what those rules are first. And you've done the homework. You've read the books. You've read, you've really. You're a resourced writer, because you've, like you said earlier. And so I think that is a critical part to this, like understanding what those rules are first, certainly in the screenwriting world. And then you can, decide what rules are worth breaking.
Yes. For some reason, I'm reminded of this writer. His name is Wells Tower. And
that's a great name.
What a great name. He's another controversial figure, because his haters, his detractors, say like, if my name was Wells Tower, I would have been published a bunch of times too. And I'm trying to, like, looking at my bookshelf and trying to see the book that I can find. But I'm going to come around. Bear with me.
Yeah.
Heard about this guy because of an audition for a film that came through that was shot in Atlanta called, it's not called Dope Sick. But there was another one. It just came out. It's on Netflix right now, starring Emily Blunt. And Painkillers. Right. I auditioned for Painkillers.
Oh, rad.
And when the audition came in, I look at all the names in the breakdown: the producers, the director, the writer, the stars, whoever's name. I look them all up, because I kind of just have a point of contact. Sometimes that can steer your audition a little bit too, and it did for this one. I didn't get the gig, but I saw who it was written by, this guy named Wells Tower. I saw that he was about my own age. I remembered that the description, the character breakdown was like a former band guy. It's like there was some musical connotation to it. And I was like, this guy's going to like, I bet he listened to The Cure, because he's kind of a weirdo, and he's right around that era. So I went and fished out a Cure t-shirt, and I made that part of my thing. Anyway.
That's great.
Didn't book the role.
But still, this is great.
But it's okay. This is what's even more interesting, or maybe the actual interest of this story is that, so I look up his name, Wells Towers, he's a screenplay writer. And, oh wow, he came out with this collection of short stories 10 or 12 years ago that destroyed the world. Everybody, it had countless articles written about it. I'm like, fuck, I gotta find out about this guy. To this, it's the best collection of short stories I've ever read.
Whoa.
It's just so fun. And talk about a personal voice. And the last story is the title of the book, and I'm just so ridiculous. Wells Tower, his short story collection, for y'all out there. We'll put the link in the comment section if you're watching on YouTube. when I remember the title. But the last story is a conversation that takes place between two Vikings and is written in contemporary language after having raided a small town. And it's like, it makes you cry. And it makes you cry because you think that people have never changed. People don't change. They still love their loved ones. They're scared for the futures of their children. They're like, it's amazing writing, right?
Wow.
And it's it's wildly inventive also. So yay, all of that.
Yeah.
And what startles me is that Rand and I watched Painkillers 2 nights ago, and I was like, man, you would never know what a gifted writer this guy is by watching this movie, because the nature of a screenplay, it doesn't have, you can't be so playful with your language. You can't paint that picture. You're telling a fairly linear story. Mm-hmm. And it's this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And all of the ways that you're describing what happens and what happens are not available to you in a screenplay. So I'm like, I don't think that, buddy, that your gift is this milieu.
So let me ask you this: when you read the sides, though, so you watched it with your wife, and you felt like, man, it was missing the magic of his actual, writing abilities, But when you read the sides and there was scene direction in there and dialogue, did you still get that sense, or did the excerpt of the script that you read, was it closer to his?
I would say absolutely not. I mean, it was pretty
interesting.
It's just so straightforward with screenplay writing.
Yeah.
You really are just writing direction.
It's true.
You know what I mean? And maybe if I went back now, because I read the side, did the audition, the book came 3 days later, and that's probably when I started it. And by that time, the sides are long gone. I can't even remember. It's just interesting.
Yeah.
Like, we all have our different, our different strengths and weaknesses. We also don't always know what they are. We also have to chase opportunities as they are given. I heard that screenplay with Emily Blunt as its champion sold for $50 million at Cannes 2 years ago. So that's by Netflix. And so it's like, good job. That's probably a pretty great payday.
Oh yeah,
so
certainly.
Hats off to you. Also, interestingly, I would love to have Wells on this. He probably will never be a guest on it now that we've talked about him too much. But I know that he wrote this collection of short stories, wild acclaim, yay. And then
Everything Ravaged, Everything Burned.
That's it. Everything Ravaged, Everything Burned. Thanks, Kyle.
That's a great title too. Great name, great title. Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
I think he's struggled for 15 years to write a novel. And hasn't. So that's interesting.
That is very interesting.
A writer of such precocious talent and incredible opportunity. The world's probably still waiting for that novel. Everyone who's his fan, he has a lot of them, would love to see that thing come out. So that's interesting too. How we get in our own, who knows, maybe he's just not interested.
Although I can kind of understand that to a degree, because I don't understand how people songwrite or write poetry or write flash fiction or write short stories. To me, as a long form storyteller, I am so intimidated by songwriting. I don't see how it's done. I don't understand how it's done. It's hard for me to grasp how it's done. So I can kind of understand, maybe, here's this guy, Wells Tower, who's written these incredible short stories, then sitting down, and then a screenplay, of course, is nowhere near as many words in terms of word count length as a novel. Maybe he sits down to write a novel and he's like, shoot, how do I crack this? So I can maybe kind of understand that, because again, I don't know how writers of short fiction, of short stories like yourself, I marvel at the ability to be able to songwrite and to write in the short story medium. I don't get it.
That's I don't know. We're all such weirdos.
I know. I don't know what really to take from that, other than, it's the maybe the transition isn't quite as seamless as, oh, you write short stories? Well, then you should be able, and you've written a screenplay. You should be able to just sit down and write a novel. Yeah. And maybe the reverse of that too. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how to write a novel. I wrote the Morse Code novel, that's pending right now, publication. But, I wrote it from the screenplay. So I had a structure, and I just like, it was really fun, honestly.
Yeah.
Like it was not like it wrote itself at all, but I had the beats to write to, and I just filled it all in. I was like, this is what's going on in this person's head. And that's where I love the introspective, the psychological novel.
Yes.
That's what I read novels for, largely, I think.
I have a question for you about Morse code, because okay, so let me make sure I get this. So you've got the pilot, which is getting great critical reception. You've gotten into festivals, and things are going well on that front. That obviously came from a teleplay, a screenplay or whatever for the pilot. And then also there's a completed novel. So you've got 3 manifestations essentially of this story: the screenplay, teleplay for the pilot, the actual pilot that you shot, and then the novel. What came first, and how did having an actual pilot that you shot and a screenplay inform the creative process of the novel? I'm so curious about this.
Yeah. Well, maybe I should say first why did I write a novel after the screenplay or the pilot was out? And that was because, like you, I got some hustle, and in my research of how to create the best opportunity for your creative works, which I'm interested. That's one of the reasons for this podcast. I discovered or learned or took to heart the advice of some guy talking on some video, I can't remember, advising you to like build out as much IP as possible around your around your screenplay, or so if you write a screenplay and you have a show or a movie idea, maybe write a comic book, maybe think about other ways that can carry this brand and do some world building in other genres outside of itself that they might all kind of inform.
That's so smart.
I mean, Marvel is the great example of that, where they, this comic book. So there's this whole universe. They're all these characters are interconnected. So when the movie comes out, they know that there's going to be, I hate Marvel, but that's a great example of world building. In creating massive IP. So I was like, well, we've got this pilot out. It's done. There's not going to be, I can only post so many behind the scenes pictures or whatever on social media. It's like not that interesting. But what else can I do to, create another avenue for that Morse code world and those characters and those themes? And so that was why the novel. And how I did that was like, well, like I said, I had that screenplay already. So the novel is basically this. It's almost the screenplay. It's a little bit bigger, but it was like, how can I what was interesting to me creatively for that, it was like, can I make a novel out of a 30-minute play, like screenplay? Can I create enough material, make it compelling in that, and have the scope be that as limited as that? And I found, it's a short novel. It's 50,000 words, but it's like exactly what I wanted it to be. I mean, exactly what I wanted it to be lengthwise. Let's just say that's like I've realized my greatest dreams in writing this novel. So that's why that. And, but I'm like more interested in this question of novel writing from scratch. Like, I think that, this is there's a lot of pages in these 2 books. And I am, of all of the creative things in the world, I love the novel the most. That's where my heart is, and what I've been reading since I was a little kid, and what I aspire to, and the thing that I find most challenging. And the only way that I notice that I even have a shot at doing it, and that this is screenplay writing too, in a way, any sort of long form story, is to sit and just write. Yeah. To just write. And I have an idea, I have a character, and then just keep going. And then I don't know, also not be afraid to just like take a wild ass left turn in the story just to do it, and somehow like trust that it's all going to come out in the end, or that just like, I know this is not good. Like sometimes I'm typing and I'm like, this is not good. I hate this. I hate this story. I hate this character. I'm just like trying to get my 2,000 words a day in, or whatever, when I'm really writing, it's like 2,000 words a day, and you can bang out some pages, and
that is actually my like perfect world benchmark as well. I obsess over daily word count goals because it's such a long investment of time and process to get a novel complete. I have to set those daily word count goals.
Yes.
So 1,500 to 2,000 is like a really good day for me.
Yeah.
With new prose. If I've at the end of the day, I can say I wrote 2,000 words. But dude, I think, little tangent here, and you know, maybe it can offer some encouragement to some of the listeners. Most writers write in the margins of life because there's so many other things going on, whether it's a traditional 9-to-5, whether it's being a stay-at-home parent, whether it's being an educator, like whatever. We have so much. There is no perfect world scenario. Well, there are few perfect world scenario authors out there who can just write when inspiration strikes. Most of us write when we can in the margins of life. And so that's going to look a little different for folks. But for me, what has helped is 250 to 500 words in the morning over coffee, or on an extended lunch break in between projects. Here's another 250 to 275 words. At the end of the day, maybe it's, another 500 to 1,000. And that has a cumulative effect.
Absolutely.
And if you're just chipping away at that overall word count goal, in a month or two, you've got a 50 to 65,000 word first draft.
Yeah, and that approach really pulls the carpet out from under the excuse of like, well, I just don't have enough time to write. Because if you have 20 minutes at lunch to write and you can write 100 words and you don't, well, I guess you don't want it bad enough.
Yeah.
That's a great point, man. And
did you? Sorry to cut off your thought.
Not at all.
I texted you a few weeks ago about this book called Stolen Focus. Did you?
Yeah, dude, I bought it. It's up there. I started reading it, and I
fantastic.
was telling Randa all about it.
You need to if you're listening to this and understanding like a good healthy flow state for creating art, it interests you, and you want to understand like what's really threatening our ability to focus. I highly recommend Stolen Focus.
Stolen Focus. We'll throw that one. The link in the comments.
Please do.
On the YouTube.
I only bring that up because he talks about a flow state as being one of the few instances that we can today in this digital age of doom scrolling and streaming. Writing a novel is a perfect example of being able to dedicate true focus for long stretches of time, because it's a challenging enough thing for most people, but it's a creatively fulfilling thing as well. And you just get lost in the story. And so once you exercise that muscle, once you are, you get more and more comfortable writing 500 words here, 250 words here, it's going to really start to come a lot more naturally for a lot of us.
That's really encouraging.
Yeah.
Two thoughts about that. One is, I really do feel like phones are maybe mark the end of civilization.
I share in that.
So terrible.
I share in that.
So terrible.
People, phones and AI and ChatGPT and all this stuff. Everybody's celebrating it right now. I'm not trying to, I agree. I'll just say that I agree.
Yeah, and I think that there's part of me. I've intuitively always been so attracted to the written word, and I think that's partly because I have a little bit of a Luddite gene, where I just like the old-fashioned way. There's something about me. I drive an old car, and like there's something when you read a book, words on a page, you're connected to an ancient tradition. That's extraordinary to me, and it's so much more appealing than reading like a book on a tape or reading on a Kindle. I don't have either of those things. I've never listened to a book on tape. Maybe I will someday. I'm not like saying I won't. I like podcasts, but there's something, and like to your point also. It's calming to read a book. And I noticed that, like, for me, my daily routine is I wake up early in the morning and I work on writing. But before I work on writing, I like set a timer, 30 minutes. And it's not like you have to read for 30 minutes. It's like you get 30 minutes. And it really is like that for me. I'm like, oh my God, it's my favorite time of the day. Yeah. And it puts me like reading great prose, fiction in particular, puts me in a space that is like, I feel like I'm in touch with something essential about being human, and connected to an ancient tradition, a large tradition of thinkers and feelers and the community of humans. And I'm like, I'm in this too. I'm part of this now, and I'm ready to go. And like the phone, there's no flicker, there's no screen. And, you know, that's not to say I don't fight all of that stuff too, like the distractions and everything.
For sure. Well, dude, and yeah, like recreational reading and figuring out what your genre or your interest is. Once you find that like interest in reading, whether it's in fiction or nonfiction, something changes where reading isn't something that you have to do, it's something you get to do. And I love that you were talking about setting that timer. It's like, no, you have to. It's like, no, you get to. Oh, yes, I'm gifting myself, half an hour. One other thing I'll say about Stolen Focus, just really quickly, there's a chapter in there where he interviews, he interviews all kinds of, sleep specialists and neuroscientists and experts in various fields, and he's bringing all these interviews together to hopefully understand why we've lost our ability to focus. But one of the things that he talks about with reading, there was a study that showed that readers of fiction are far more empathetic people than people who don't read fiction.
It makes complete sense to me.
Right? Because you're in the head of the author and the writer, and you're connecting with them and learning about them through the voice of their characters and their world and their worldview. And so people who read fiction more regularly tend to be more empathetic, which is so interesting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, because one of the many joys of reading for me is the opportunity to just spend time in somebody else's shoes, to have their struggles and their adventures in the comforts of your own home with a cup of coffee. And sometimes those adventures are gripping, and it teaches you, like reading about villains or reading about complicated people or simple stories. Like reading about stories, I can't but help you be empathetic. And it does have real world implications for your daily interactions. I noticed that I have a hard time sometimes taking sides on complicated issues because I'm like, I can kind of see where they're coming from, which makes me bad at rallying under causes of any kind.
But you know what? No, that is a healthy worldview, because I think social media and Twitter and everything, or sorry, X, formerly known as Twitter, it doesn't allow for it's not conducive for healthy conversation and dialogue. And so we're conditioned now to think that you ought to just have a black and white. Everything's binary, and it's like, no. I mean, life is rarely black and white. It's more gray. And I guess bringing that full circle to the conversation about reading fiction and what a joy it is to actually read, and how sacred and spiritual of a exercise it really is. I think that that's actually a great place to be in, where your default isn't flag in the sand, but rather, well, hold on, I want to understand both sides
hear you
here.
Out. Yeah, totally. Let me listen here. There's another great book. Kyle, can you look at this up for me? The writer's name is Jonathan Haidt. It's Haidt. I like him a lot, and he's a social psychologist, and that's probably not exactly the title, but he is an academic. And the book that I'm thinking of, what's the last book that he wrote, Kyle?
Coddling of the American Mind.
No, that's a good one though. It's more recent than that.
That's a great title.
Yeah.
The Anxious Generation?
No, there's another one. The Third Time's a Charm.
Yep.
Well, the ancient, like one of the things that's powerful about him, he's a stats guy, and to underscore his arguments, and he notes that the psychology or the mental health of children fell off the map like in 2010 or 2012. It's in 1 year. It was crazy, and it's really when iPhones came to the fore, and kids and social media, particularly girls, adolescent girls and social media, is toxic.
The happiness hypothesis?
It is not. I have this book. It's in another one of these in my shelf. But the point is, okay, so I'll just, Kyle will keep looking it up. And it's one of his premises, and the premise of this book is this investigation of what is really going on when we have our opinions. It's particularly like when they're emotionally driven. And it's like people... And this intuitively, it makes sense to me, but whatever position that I feel I have on any particular issue and the rationality to which I devote justifying that position, if you go a little bit deeper, it's very irrational. Like everybody is that way. And it's
Wow.
It's from an evolutionary perspective that he investigates this. And it's a very compelling argument, and it's an argument for tolerance and for patience and for taking time to understand, and for empathy is really positioned. And for that reason, I wish this guy every success. And he also is not on social media, understandably. But he's great. You can find him on YouTube, his talks. And he's not like, somehow he's not a very political position. It's kind of apolitical.
Well, it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be.
That is so counter to our culture and society right now, where there is such a mob mentality. And it sounds like the things that he's talking about and the observations that he's making cut directly against that, which I think we need right now so desperately.
Absolutely.
Man. Oh,
The Righteous Mind?
That's it.
boom.
Righteous Mind.
Aptly titled, it sounds like, given everything you were just sharing
Yeah,
about his
it's spot
position.
on.
Yeah.
Kyle, what are we at?
Just over an hour.
Okay.
Already?
I know. Time just flies too quickly.
I'm shocked by that. Sorry.
Well, we should wrap it up, but this is so fun, and we'll have to have you back on so we can just keep talking about
I'd love
books
that.
and writing and approach to creativity. I hope that people got something out of this and feel empowered and inspired. I'm a big fan of Julian Vaca, and you got to check out these books. The Recall Paradox is the first one.
That's actually the sequel.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The Memory Index is the first one.
It's a little confusing because the first one came out in hardcover and got this beautiful hardcover treatment. The second one went straight to trade paperback. So if you're like me and you love having consistency on your bookshelf, I apologize in advance. Hopefully it doesn't take away from the reading experience or the story itself. But yeah, it's the Memory Index duology.
But if you're like me and you prefer reading paperbacks, then you're probably in store for a treat. Because is this also available in
Not
paperback?
yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, stay tuned. Julian, thank you so much. I wish you the best.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Cheers. Hey, thanks for watching. Click the like and subscribe button if you wouldn't mind. You can click over here to watch another complete episode, or click here to watch a playlist of the songs of the Morse Code Podcast. You know you want to. You know you want to. You know you want to.